You've probably noticed something. Maybe you've experienced it yourself. Maybe you've watched friends go through it. Maybe you've just been paying attention to the patterns around you. There seems to be an epidemic of entitlement, materialism, and selfishness in modern dating. And a lot of men are asking the same question. Why? The first dates where she orders the most expensive thing on the menu and expects you to pay without acknowledgement. The relationships where her needs are urgent, but yours are optional. The breakups where somehow you're always the problem regardless of what actually happened. The dating profiles that read like lists of demands with nothing offered in return. But here's what most people get wrong. They think this is about individual women making individual choices. They think it's about finding the good ones versus the bad ones. They think the solution is just to be more selective or to change their approach. They're missing the bigger picture. What if the behaviors you're seeing aren't random? What if the entitlement, the materialism, the dysfunction? What if all of it is being actively encouraged, not by a secret conspiracy, but by something much simpler and much more powerful? Economics. Today, we're going to talk about why modern dating feels broken, why so many relationships seem doomed from the start, and why the system itself might be designed to keep you frustrated, dependent, and alone. This isn't about blaming women. This is about understanding the game everyone is being played by. Let's start with a truth that's going to reframe everything. The system isn't targeting you personally. It's not targeting men specifically. It's not even aware you exist as an individual. The system, by which I mean the combined machinery of government, corporations, media, and cultural institutions, operates on one principle: economic incentive. Things happen when they're profitable. Things don't happen when they're not. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's just how large systems work. No one is sitting in a room plotting against men or against families. But the cumulative effect of millions of profit-driven decisions creates outcomes that feel like someone designed them. When you understand this, the behaviors you're seeing in modern dating start to make sense. Not because women are inherently greedy or rude, but because the entire culture is being shaped by forces that benefit from dysfunction. The question isn't why are there so many problematic people. The question is what is creating them? Here's an uncomfortable economic truth. Relationship instability generates more economic activity than stability. Think about what happens when a long-term relationship ends. 2 households instead of 1. 2 sets of rent or mortgage payments. 2 sets of furniture. 2 sets of utilities. Lawyers get paid. Therapists get paid. Dating apps get new subscribers. The entire breakup industrial complex springs into action. Now, think about what a stable long-term relationship produces economically. Shared expenses, fewer purchases, less consumption, more saving. From a pure economic standpoint, a happy couple is less profitable than 2 miserable singles desperately trying to find connection. This doesn't mean anyone is deliberately sabotaging relationships, but it does mean there's no economic incentive to promote stability. The culture, the media, the apps, none of them benefit from helping you find lasting partnership. Dating apps don't want you to find the one. They want you to keep swiping. Social media doesn't want you content in a relationship. It wants you scrolling, comparing, feeling inadequate, buying things to fill the void. The dysfunction you're experiencing isn't a bug. It's a feature. Consider the wedding industry alone. Billions of dollars spent on ceremonies that last hours for marriages that increasingly don't last years. Nobody profits from telling you to keep it simple. Everyone profits from convincing you that you need the perfect dress, the perfect venue, the perfect photographer. And then when the marriage fails, the divorce industry is waiting. This creates a culture where the transaction is emphasized over the relationship, where the wedding matters more than the marriage, where the appearance of love generates more revenue than the reality of it. Want proof that the system can move quickly when it wants to? Look at how fast things changed during the pandemic. Within weeks, entire economies were restructured, laws were changed, behavioral mandates were implemented, trillions of dollars were mobilized, supply chains were redirected. The machinery of government and industry proved it could pivot on a dime when there was sufficient incentive. Now, compare that to any issue affecting families and relationships. Divorce reform, decades of nothing. Family court bias, still waiting. support systems for struggling fathers, minimal movement, mental health resources for men, underfunded and overlooked. The disparity tells you everything. The system can act fast when it wants to. It doesn't want to act on these issues because there's no profit in solving them. Broken families create consumers. Lonely people buy more. Anxious people are easier to manipulate. Stable, content, connected people are economically inconvenient. This isn't cynicism. It's just observation. Pay attention to what gets normalized in popular culture, not what gets criticized or debated. What gets quietly accepted as just how things are. Shows that glorify chaotic relationships. Music that celebrates materialism and transactional dynamics. Social media that rewards provocative content over substance. Platforms where explicit content is the fastest path to income for young women. Dating shows that treat relationships as competitions. None of this is accidental. It is profitable. When a young woman sees that she can make more money in a month from provocative content than she could in a year at a regular job, what lesson does she learn about her value? When relationship chaos gets millions of views, but quiet stability gets ignored, what behaviors get reinforced? The culture isn't reflecting human nature. It's shaping it. And it's shaping it in directions that serve economic interests, not human flourishing. The rude and greedy behaviors you're encountering aren't emerging from nowhere. They're being cultivated, rewarded, and normalized by a culture that profits from them. Think about what a young woman absorbs from culture by the time she's 25. She's been told she's a queen who deserves everything. She's been told that having standards means having demands. She's been told that men should prove themselves through spending. She's been shown that attention equals value, and that the more attention she can command, the more she's worth. None of this is preparing her for actual partnership. All of it is preparing her for extraction. And here's the dark part. The same culture is doing something similar to men, teaching them that their value is what they provide. That love must be earned through performance. That they should accept whatever treatment they receive, because they're lucky to have someone. Both genders are being programmed, just in different directions, in ways that make them incompatible. Society still promotes an idealized vision of marriage. Two people building a life together, growing old as partners, creating stability for children and community. But that vision is economically incompatible with the modern system. A stable marriage generates relatively little economic activity. The couple shares resources, lives within their means, saves for the future. They're not constantly churning through new relationships, new living situations, new purchases to cope with instability. Divorce, on the other hand, is an economic bonanza. Legal fees, asset division, two households, child support payments that flow through the system, therapy for everyone involved, dating expenses as both parties try again. Potentially multiple rounds of this as second and third marriages fail at even higher rates. The system tells you it wants you to find lasting love. The system's incentives tell a different story. This is why the culture promotes unrealistic expectations. Why it glamorizes the search for something better. Why it frames commitment as settling. Not because anyone is plotting against marriage, but because instability is simply more profitable than stability. Let's talk about something a lot of men feel but hesitate to say out loud. The sense of being exploited. Modern dating often feels like a one-way transaction. Men are expected to provide financially, emotionally, practically, while the expectations flowing the other direction seem minimal or optional. He pays for dates, but suggesting otherwise makes him cheap. He provides emotional support, but his emotional needs are too much. He's expected to lead, but leading is controlling. He's expected to be vulnerable, but vulnerability makes him weak. The rules seem designed to be unwinnable. Whatever he does is wrong. Whatever he gives isn't enough. The goalposts move constantly. This frustration is valid. But understanding where it comes from is important. These dynamics aren't created by individual women being evil. They emerge from a culture that has taught everyone confused and contradictory things about what relationships should be. Everyone is operating from broken scripts. And the result is mutual frustration. The exploitation isn't personal. It's systemic. And recognizing that is the first step toward navigating it. Here's something that doesn't get discussed enough. Men's emotional vulnerability makes them susceptible to dysfunctional dynamics. Men fall hard. When a man becomes emotionally attached, he often becomes irrational about it. He'll tolerate treatment he'd never accept in any other context. He'll make sacrifices that destroy his own well-being. He'll stay in situations that are clearly toxic because his attachment overrides his judgment. This vulnerability is human and understandable, but it's also exploitable. In a culture that doesn't teach men how to manage their emotions around relationships, it becomes a liability. Men are told to be stoic, to suppress emotion, to handle everything themselves. Then they encounter romantic attachment, one of the most powerful emotional experiences humans can have. With no tools to navigate it, the result is often codependency, desperation, poor decision-making, and willingness to accept treatment that should be unacceptable. Understanding this isn't about blaming men or excusing bad behavior from partners. It's about recognizing that emotional intelligence and self-awareness are essential survival skills in modern dating. The man who understands his own attachment patterns, who can recognize when he's being irrational, who has developed the ability to walk away from situations that don't serve him. That man is protected in ways that his emotionally unaware counterpart is not. This isn't about becoming cold or detached. It's about developing the capacity to love without losing yourself, to connect without becoming dependent, to give without being depleted. There's a narrative that's been sold to men for generations. Be a gentleman. Sacrifice for her. Put her needs first. Give up everything in a divorce because that's what a real man does. Provide endlessly because that's your role. This narrative served a purpose in a different era, when there was social reciprocity, when the sacrifice went both directions, when the deal was genuinely mutual. But the narrative hasn't updated, even as the social contract has changed completely. Men are still expected to sacrifice like it's 1950 while receiving none of the respect, loyalty, or reciprocity that 1950 provided. The obligations remain while the benefits have evaporated. The gentleman myth isn't about genuine virtue anymore. It's a tool for extracting compliance from men who haven't realized the deal has changed. It keeps men giving while receiving less and less in return. This isn't an argument against being a good person. It's an argument for being a smart one. Generosity should be mutual. Sacrifice should be reciprocal. And outdated narratives should be examined rather than blindly followed. The man who gives endlessly while receiving nothing isn't a gentleman. He's a mark. The man who sacrifices his well-being for someone who wouldn't sacrifice a minor inconvenience for him isn't noble. He's being exploited. True virtue requires wisdom. It means being generous with people who deserve generosity. It means being protective of people who would protect you in return. It means reserving your sacrifice for relationships, where sacrifice flows both directions. The gentleman myth strips virtue of wisdom and turns it into blind compliance. That's not character. That's programming. Let's talk about what's actually influencing the people you're trying to date. There's an entire industry of influencers, pseudo-psychologists, and relationship experts whose business model depends on keeping their audience anxious, single, and consuming content. They promote unrealistic standards. They encourage women to see every male behavior as a red flag. They frame normal relationship friction as abuse. They validate every grievance while promoting zero self-reflection. They tell women they deserve everything while owing nothing. This content gets engagement because it tells people what they want to hear. That their problems are everyone else's fault. That their standards are justified no matter how unrealistic. That they're victims rather than participants. The result is a generation of people entering relationships with completely warped expectations. Trained to see threats everywhere. Primed to bail at the first sign of difficulty. The influencers benefit. The platforms benefit. The individuals consuming this content end up alone and confused, wondering why their relationships keep failing. When you encounter someone with impossible standards, constant suspicion, and zero accountability, ask yourself what they've been consuming. The programming runs deep. This isn't unique to women. Men have their own version of toxic influence. Content that promotes using women, avoiding commitment, treating relationships as purely transactional. The manosphere can be just as damaging to healthy relationship formation as the female empowerment industrial complex. Both sides are being fed content that makes them worse partners. Both sides are being trained to see the other as adversaries rather than potential allies. The influencers profit from the conflict. The platforms profit from the engagement. And real people end up alone, wondering why connection seems impossible. The dysfunction we're describing isn't abstract. It has real casualties. Divorce rates remain stubbornly high. Single-parent households continue to increase. Children grow up without fathers or with fathers they barely see. Men's mental health deteriorates in silence. Male suicide rates remain dramatically higher than female rates, with divorced men being at particularly high risk. These aren't just statistics. These are human beings whose lives are being shaped by a dysfunctional system. The breakdown of family structures, the erosion of meaningful connection, the epidemic of loneliness. These are symptoms of something deeply wrong. Not wrong with individuals, but wrong with the culture that's producing these outcomes at scale. When a system consistently produces bad outcomes, the system is the problem. Blaming individuals for navigating a broken system poorly misses the point. Women or victimizing men. Both are being churned through a machine that doesn't care about either. Women aren't winning either, even if it sometimes looks like they are. The same system that teaches entitlement also teaches them to delay commitment until it's too late. It tells them their value is unlimited when it actually changes over time. It encourages them to hold out for perfection, while perfection doesn't exist. The result is record numbers of women in their late 30s and 40s who are single, childless, and confused about how they got there. They followed the script they were given, and the script failed them. Everyone is losing. The system produces bad outcomes for everyone except the people profiting from the dysfunction. So what does a healthy relationship actually look like in this environment? It starts with equality, not in the sense of keeping score, but in the sense of mutual investment. Both people bring value. Both people sacrifice. Both people contribute to building something together. It requires emotional control, not suppression, but management. The ability to feel intensely without being controlled by those feelings. The ability to have difficult conversations without everything becoming a crisis. It demands responsibility. Both people owning their actions, their contributions to problems, their role in making things better. No one gets to be the permanent victim, while the other is the permanent problem. It needs realistic expectations. Understanding that no person will meet every need, that relationships require work, that the fantasy sold by culture is not achievable or even desirable. It's built on reliability. Showing up consistently, doing what you say you'll do, being someone your partner can count on through difficulty. None of this is complicated, but it runs directly counter to what modern culture promotes. Finding someone who operates this way requires filtering through a lot of people who've been programmed differently. The good news is that people who want healthy relationships tend to find each other eventually. When you operate from these principles, you repel people who don't share them and attract people who do. The filtering process is painful, but it works. The key is not lowering your standards to match the dysfunction around you. The key is raising yourself to deserve the standards you hold. Part of what makes modern dating so chaotic is the absence of shared guidelines. The old rules, traditional gender roles, clear expectations, social enforcement of norms, have been largely dismantled. And regardless of what you think about those old rules, at least they provided structure. People knew what was expected. There was a shared framework. What replaced them? Nothing coherent. We demolished the old structure without building a new one. Now everyone is improvising, operating from different assumptions, following different scripts, often without even realizing their script doesn't match their partner's. He thinks he's supposed to lead. She thinks leadership is oppression. She thinks he should express emotions. He's been taught that emotions are weakness. He expects partnership. She expects to be pursued indefinitely. The mismatches are endless. Until culture develops new shared frameworks, or until individuals consciously create their own, this chaos will continue. Every relationship becomes a negotiation from scratch with no shared starting point. That's exhausting for everyone, and it explains a lot of the conflict you're experiencing. The solution, at least on an individual level, is to be explicit about your own framework. To communicate clearly what you expect, what you offer, what you need. To find partners who share or at least respect your operating principles. The couples who make it in this environment are usually the ones who've consciously negotiated their own rules, rather than assuming shared understanding. They've had the awkward conversations. They've made the implicit. Is that people who want healthy relationships tend to find each other eventually. When you operate from these principles, you repel people who don't share them and attract people who do. The filtering process is painful, but it works. The key is not lowering your standards to match the dysfunction around you. The key is raising yourself to deserve the standards you hold. Part of what makes modern dating so chaotic is the absence of shared guidelines. The old rules, traditional gender roles, clear expectations, social enforcement of norms, have been largely dismantled. And regardless of what you think about those old rules, at least they provided structure. People knew what was expected. There was a shared framework. What replaced them? Nothing coherent. We demolished the old structure without building a new one. Now everyone is improvising, operating from different assumptions, following different scripts, often without even realizing their script doesn't match their partner's. He thinks he's supposed to lead. She thinks leadership is oppression. She thinks he should express emotions. He's been taught that emotions are weakness. He expects partnership. She expects to be pursued indefinitely. The mismatches are endless. Until culture develops new shared frameworks, or until individuals consciously create their own, this chaos will continue. Every relationship becomes a negotiation from scratch with no shared starting point. That's exhausting for everyone, and it explains a lot of the conflict you're experiencing. The solution, at least on an individual level, is to be explicit about your own framework. To communicate clearly what you expect, what you offer, what you need. To find partners who share or at least respect your operating principles. The couples who make it in this environment are usually the ones who've consciously negotiated their own rules, rather than assuming shared understanding. They've had the awkward conversations. They've made the implicit explicit. They've built their own framework because culture failed to provide one. Here's where we land. The system is broken, and it's not going to fix itself anytime soon. Economic incentives will continue to promote dysfunction. Culture will continue to normalize chaos. Influencers will continue to poison expectations. The machinery that profits from your loneliness will keep running. So what do? You become resilient. You develop yourself regardless of what's happening around you. You build your life into something valuable whether or not you find partnership. You refuse to let a broken system define your worth or your possibilities. You work on your own issues, the emotional wounds that make you susceptible to dysfunction. Heal them. The patterns that keep leading you to the wrong people. Examine them. The neediness that makes you accept treatment you shouldn't accept. Address it. You raise your standards while also raising your own value. You become the kind of person who attracts quality by being quality. And you maintain hope. Not naive hope that ignores reality, but grounded hope that knows good people still exist even in a broken system. They're just harder to find. The irony is that becoming someone who doesn't need a relationship is often the prerequisite for having a good one. Desperation attracts predators. Wholeness attracts partners. When you've built a life that's complete on its own, when you've healed the wounds that made you vulnerable to manipulation, when you've developed the discernment to recognize dysfunction early, that's when you become capable of choosing wisely rather than choosing desperately. The broken system makes this harder, but it doesn't make it impossible. Ultimately, your outcomes are still determined by your choices, even in an environment designed to make good choices difficult. So why are there so many rude and greedy people in modern dating? Because the system rewards rudeness and greed. Because culture normalizes entitlement. Because economic incentives favor dysfunction. Because the old rules were destroyed without new ones being created. Because everyone is operating from broken scripts they didn't write, and don't even recognize as scripts. It's not that human nature has changed. It's that the environment shaping human behavior has changed in directions that serve economic interests rather than human flourishing. Understanding this doesn't fix it, but it does change how you navigate it. Stop taking it personally. It's not about you. It's about a system that produces these outcomes reliably and at scale. Stop expecting the system to change. It won't. The incentives are too strong. Start building yourself into someone who can thrive regardless. Someone who doesn't need the system to cooperate in order to live a good life. This is the ultimate answer. Not changing other people. Not fixing the system. Not complaining about how things should be. Just becoming someone who can navigate reality as it actually is. The man who has built himself into someone valuable, who has developed emotional intelligence, who can recognize dysfunction and walk away from it, who has a life worth living regardless of relationship status. That man will either find partnership or be content without it. Either outcome is acceptable. The man who needs external validation, who falls for every manipulation, who accepts poor treatment because he fears being alone, that man will suffer regardless of whether he finds someone. The relationship becomes another form of pain rather than a solution to it. The question we started with, why are there so many rude and greedy women, turns out to be the wrong question. The right question is, what kind of system produces so much dysfunction? Once you see the answer clearly, you stop being confused and start being strategic. You're not fighting against women. You're not fighting against men. You're navigating a system that's been optimized for profit rather than for human connection. That's not hopeless. It's clarifying. When you understand the game, you can decide how to play it, or whether to play it at all. The system doesn't care about your happiness. So you have to build yourself, heal yourself, raise your standards and your values simultaneously. Find the people who've escaped the programming. They exist. And never forget, the dysfunction you're seeing isn't human nature. It's manufactured, which means different environments produce different outcomes. You can create those environments in your own life, attract people who resonate with them, and build something real despite everything working against you.